a lot of people think that I'm going to get into a lot of figures and things like that, and I'm really not. I've already been approached by a number of people saying, are you going to talk about this? You're going to talk about that? And my answer is no. So I'm going to talk about something basic. Most of us know in our lifetime that we've gone from a creditor nation to a debtor nation, and that our currency is under more and more problems. It's becoming to the point where nations are no longer wanting to use the dollar as the basis of the world currency, if you will. And I'd like to throw out a question to you. Does anybody really believe that we're not marching towards socialism? Now, if that's the case, somebody must want it that way. You know, that's pretty obvious. Now, I'm not going to get into how it's being done, but I'm going to say why it is being done and by whom. It's general knowledge behind what you see happening, not facts and figures that you won't remember for 5 minutes. You know, a lot of people come out and they give you tables and they show you these hockey stick charts and all of that, and 5 minutes later, what did he say? I want you to be able to leave the room and remember in general what was presented instead of trying to remember facts and figures. I want to start with this document. This is my personal copy of the Communist Manifesto, comes straight from Moscow. In fact, it's in English. So they spell labor with an O-U instead of just an O. That sort of thing. Most people forget that it was written by two people, not one. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Now, in the 1872 edition, they had this to say: the Communist League and International Association of Workers, which could, of course, be only a secret one, under the conditions obtaining at the time, commissioned the undersigned at the Congress held in London in November of 1847 to draw up for publication a detailed theoretical and practical program of the party. Such was the origin of the following manifesto. The manuscript, which traveled to London to be printed a few weeks before the February Revolution. Now, what they're talking about are the revolutions of 1848, that in your history books tell you these were democratic revolutions. They were planned. They were not spontaneous. These things, as this document illustrates, was produced as a tool to codify what they wanted the revolutionaries to accomplish in their countries, to communize those countries in the coming revolutions. It was a planned operation, not spontaneous. All they did was codify the techniques to bring about a totalitarian state in the name of the people. And these have been used by Rome up through Machiavelli to modern times, and now they're calling it communism. In fact, the word socialism had come under such disrepute that they decided to call it communism. They coined a new word. Now, it's exactly the opposite today, isn't it? In the minds of people, communists are the baddie and socialists are their moderates. But that's never been the case. It's an illusion. At any rate, by 1871, there were at least 3 different translations of this document published and distributed in the United States. Again, I want to remind you that the Communist League, which was the new name, actually started out the League of Outlaws, then it changed its name to the League of the Just, and then finally, with the publication of this, they changed it to the Communist League. It was a secret society. And again, it was commissioned. It was a tool to be used in a planned operation. Now, according to Engels, later on, he said they never dropped the secret society within communism. Therefore, you could promote communism without actually being a member of the Communist Party. You could work for communism and get up and say under oath, I've never been a member of the Communist Party. They don't ask, well, are you a member of the Communist League? Are you a member of the secret society that really operates things behind the scenes for the Communist Party? And here's something that most people don't know. In 1872, the headquarters of the Communist First Internationale, the umbrella over all of communism, was moved to New York City, 1872. And it was put under the charge of Frederick Sorge, is how it's actually pronounced, Sorge in English. He is the grand uncle of the famous Sorge, spy-ring Sorge in Japan, for those of you who know about that affair in Japan. At any rate, he was a friend of Karl Marx and Engels, and he was put in charge of the communist apparatus in the United States. Now, inside this document, it says that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class and to win the battle of democracy. And they really mean that. They want a democracy. Now, we know that our country is a republic, do we not? We stand and pledge allegiance to the flag and the republic for which it stands. Section 4 in the Constitution says that they guarantee a republican form of government for every state. So you will not find the word democracy in any place in the Constitution, nor will you find it in any of the 50 state constitutions. It's not there. The word you see is republic or republican. So what's the difference? For those of us who've seen overview and read other things, we know that a republic is a limitation on government whose main responsibility is to protect God-given rights. That equals liberty. In a democracy, however, it is the majority rule disregarding any limitations. It leads to overbearing government, crushing debt, and the erosion of individual, minority, and property rights in the name of the majority. So the majority can do just about anything it wants and do it to the minority. Now, as we've seen in overview, we know that there is actually a scale of government that is not used in the history books that we studied when we were in school. It is a scale of government control and intensity of 0 to 100%. And on the left you see communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism. You can even throw in the word corporatism as they are doing today. And then on the right is no government. But what we want is a certain amount of government to protect the rights of the people. In other words, there should be a certain amount of police power to protect us from the criminals and from invasion and that sort of thing. And so this is the proper scale, and you'll see it's just a little bit to the right of halfway. Now, if we're a republic, then why is it that our political leaders keep referring to us as a democracy? Again, to win the battle of democracy. That's what the communists want. That is their first step that they're trying to achieve in the manifesto. Come right out and say it. And they understand what democracy means. Most people, I know I did, when the first time I read the Communist Manifesto, I thought that they were lying. I thought that they were misusing the term democracy. And that was when I think actually it was a little higher. Now that I've gotten old, I'm shrinking. So I was about here when I first read the Communist Manifesto, and I thought, well, these guys are really rotten guys. This is propaganda. They're trying to convince people they want democracy, but they really did. And it was me that was all messed up. I didn't recognize the difference between republic and democracy, because I'd been told in school that they were the same. They're interchangeable. But that's not true. And so what is the second step after a democracy? They say they will use its political supremacy to wrest by degrees all capital and production in the hands of the state. So they are going through in the name of democracy, using the majority to make all capital and all production move under the state. Nobody will own property, nobody will have the means of production, etc. And with the proletariat organized as the ruling class. Now, ruling class, that really doesn't sound like democracy to me. If you've got a ruling class, that's really not democracy. So what they want is a democracy evolving into a proletariat as an organized body within the democracy, and then transfer everything into the state. Give the state total control over everything. Don't ever forget, they're talking about a ruling class here. They're not talking about a majority. The second step then is to bring about a state power structure called communism in the name of the people and democracy. Now, the Communist Manifesto outlines 10 measures for accomplishing the overthrow of the existing governments. Now, most people remember what these are. who've ever read the document. What they forget is to read what I like to call the preamble of explaining these steps to you. And in there is the nub of the whole thing, the understanding of what is really trying to be accomplished. And it says, of course, in the beginning, we're starting right here, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which in the course of the movement outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. Now, this is primarily written for the working class. So if you take out the mode of production, just leave that off, you get a better sense of what this thing is really all about. They're talking about what? They're talking about despotic roads on the rights of property, but they say they want inroads upon the old social order. The social order is everything, okay? They want to change everything. And so in the course of that, these things are proposed to do just that. First of all, abolition of property and land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Now, if you rent and you do not pay your rent, what happens to you? You get evicted. If you own and you don't pay your property taxes, what happens to you? Would you explain the difference to me, please? The government has already implemented this step in the name of property taxes, and everybody thinks that we're free. Zoning, etc. You know, they literally control property. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Boy, I'm glad we don't have that one. You know, every time I read Samuel and he's explaining to the Israelites why they shouldn't have a king. Do you know that this man is going to tax you 10%? And I think, oh, Lord, please, if we can get back to that. Give me a king, you know. Any rate, the rest of the measures are to bring communication, transportation, industry, agriculture, and the schools under the control of a democracy. But the fifth one is the one we're concerned about here today, and that's centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. What does that sound like? Federal Reserve. And aren't we glad we have that to stop inflation and depression and things of that nature? So, again, the second step is to formulate a new state that controls all capital, production, property, and education. In the name of the people and democracy, the state would become all-powerful. Rather, those who run the state would become powerful. So what's the third step? The communist labors everywhere for the union and agreement of the democratic parties of all countries. A union of democratic parties. In other words, all these communist parties will unite. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can only be attained by the forcible overthrow of all existing governments, social conditions. Social conditions. Let the ruling class tremble at the communist revolution. The proletariat have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries, unite. So the communists work for union with every country, a world union, a world government. And by the way, remember in the preamble to all that, it said that these things are at first appear untenable, and they, in the course, however, they outstrip themselves and necessitate further inroads on the old social order. Let me give you an example of that. Take Social Security. What was that? By the way, a show of hands, who here wants to retire only on Social Security? Show of hands. None? Well, that was sold on the idea that you could, you see. But then they found out, well, gee, they can't, because when they get older, they go to the doctor more frequently, right? And so as a result of that, they needed to have a system put in place to take care of people on Social Security that couldn't afford to go to the doctor. And so it became Medicare. Well, then they found out that doesn't work, and now what do we have? Obamacare. Now, the way it's going to take care of the problem is when you get to a certain age, you don't get to see the doctor. But at any rate, you see, at first, they appear untenable. But then it outstrips themselves, necessitating further inroads on the old social order. Social Security, Medicare, Obamacare. Obamacare isn't the last step. You think that one's bad, what they have planned for the next step is going to be awful. And so it's a problem. And it's because people don't understand the basic principles, they can't connect the dots, they can't look out over the horizon to see the ramifications of these very simple things at the beginning. So what do they call this concept? This one government, this one world government. What do they call that? The first time I can find this term being used by Marx and Engels is in the Holy Family in 1846. The revolutionary movement, which began in 1789 in the Cercle Social, gave rise to the communist idea of the New World Order, and those italics are in the original. They call this concept a New World Order. For those of you who are taking notes, and for those of you who are not, please take a note on this one. Write down Cercle Social and look it up. You will find some very interesting history, particularly as it relates to the United States. The communists have never changed from the things that they wanted. Now, these are out of my own library. And this one, in fact, I used this one to show that they have been promoting Obamacare for years in here. And this was in about 1970. But at any rate, for over 160 years, the secret communist apparatus has had a plan. Destroy the republic and the social order to be replaced by an international socialist government. The old social order includes religion, which Marx called the opiate of the people. God was to be replaced by the state. That is what's happening in our country today. God is being removed from all public life where government reigns. Remember in Nazi Germany, what replaced God in the schools? Hitler. They had a picture of Hitler in all the classrooms, and they sang songs of praise to Adolf Hitler. Have you noticed the rise of the personality cult of the individual who is in the White House today? It's incredible. So, are our government leaders stupid? Are they ignorant of this basic plan of the communists? If not, then they must have a plan as well if we keep marching towards socialism. You don't think that all these lawyers and political scientists who are in government have never read the Communist Manifesto? Of course they have. So they have to know what the plan is, and if they are marching down the road to implementing that plan, they must want it that way. Now, in 1912, we talked about it a little bit earlier, over 1 million votes in this country were cast for socialist candidates. Now, Eugene Victor Debs was the candidate for president, but he wasn't on the ballot in all the states. But if you and he almost got 1 million votes, but if you take all the socialist candidates that were on the ballot in the United States, you know, running for Senate or Congress or whatever, it came to well over 1 million votes. The problem that we had was that you had the progressive Wilson, who won the election over the progressive parties, Roosevelt, and the Republican William Howard Taft. Now, what does progressive mean? If you're a progressive, what does that mean? You're a socialist. Everybody knows that today. And yet, when you go to the history books, what do they say that Roosevelt ran on? He ran on the Bull Moose Party. Because they don't want you to ask, well, what does progressive mean? Anyone who reads Roosevelt's speeches after he was in the White House can come to no other conclusion than the man was a socialist as much as his nephew, who occupied the White House in the 30s and 40s. No question about it. Taft's father, Alfonso, was the co-founder of the infamous secret society at Yale, Skull and Bones. So no matter who you voted for in 1912, you lost. But then the next year following the election, Our government established two planks of the Communist Manifesto, the graduated income tax and the central bank. This is a cartoon out of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch of 1911. And this is Karl Marx, right here, Karl Marx, with a book on socialism on Wall Street. And everybody back here is running towards him to shake his hand. And the first guys to get there are J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and Carnegie. So you see, and by the way, people think that these big robber barons, as they used to call them, should be against socialism, should be against communism. But that's not the case. You know, they forget that Engels, the author, co-author of the Communist Manifesto, was an industrialist. Frederick Engels was an industrialist. Robert Owen, probably the most notorious communist industrialist from England, Scotland actually, establishing communes in the United States. The most famous one was New Harmony. He was an industrialist. It's about power, not money or capitalism. Now, there's only one entity that can control everything, and that's totalitarian government. There's not a single man up here on the screen that had a penny. They were all poor, living on the streets. Once they came to power, they had everything because they had total control. The same bankers, some of them, who established the Federal Reserve included men who financed Leon Trotsky and the Bolshevik Revolution. They sent $20 million to Lenin through Trotsky to establish communism in Russia. Now, a few people saw the danger. Just pick out a couple here, particularly the father of Charles Lindbergh Jr., who flew the Atlantic solo. His father was in the Congress, and he said this new law will create inflation whenever the trusts want inflation. As late as 1968, Wright Patman, Democrat of Texas, he was chairman of the House Banking Committee. He said, in the United States today, we have in effect two governments. We have the duly constituted government, then we have an independent, uncontrolled, and uncoordinated government in the Federal Reserve. Here's a man that you should go online and look up and read his entire speech that he gave on the floor of the House, I believe it was in 1933. It's Louis T. McFadden. And he said essentially much and far more than Ron Paul said about the Federal Reserve and demanded that it be audited back then. And in there he gives you clues that the Federal Reserve was helping finance the buildup of the German and Japanese war machines with your tax money and mine. And of course I wasn't alive in 1933, but it was my dad's tax money, okay? Just like they're doing today, and sending billions to the European Union to bail out those countries over there. So, what does the Constitution say about money? It says that the Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and a foreign coin, and fix the standards of weights and measures. So, in other words, they can establish a mint to stamp the people's precious metals into coinage of a fixed size, weight, and purity. That's not print, that's coin. It's a big difference between the two words. They can determine and then publish the value of various foreign coinage. We had foreign coinage that was circulating throughout the system, and that's fine. That should be fine. If foreign coins that have intrinsic value of silver, copper, or gold are in our economy, then all we need to know is what are they worth. They might be a little bit different than our coins. So the government would establish what they're worth, and so we knew how to trade back and forth. Create a standard of weights and measures to facilitate normal transactions. In other words, we didn't have a standard of weights and measures necessarily in those days. So they had to establish something so the people in Maine could trade with the people in Georgia and know that a pound in Maine was the same as a pound in Georgia, or a dollar was the same, or whatever, so that they could trade fairly back and forth. In National Geographic magazine in January of '93, The Power of Money was the article, written by Peter White. In the article, Mr. White relates that he had just been told by a federal official that the federal government had purchased $100 million in treasury bills from some security dealers. He related his exchange with a federal official as follows. The question, where did the Fed get that $100 million? Answer, we created it, a Fed official tells me. He means that any time the central bank writes a check, so to speak, it creates money. It's money that didn't exist before, he says. Question, is there any limit on that? No limit. Only the good judgment and conscience of the responsible Federal Reserve people. Well, I couldn't do business with a conscience like that. Now, where did they get this vast authority? It was delegated to them in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Based on the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Congress shall have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof. Doesn't say print, it says coin. The Federal Reserve is an unelected few appointed to its Board of Governors by the President for 14-year terms, have been awarded completely unconstitutional power to decide the amount of currency, the value of the currency, set interest rates, and be able to create booms and busts. And if you're an insider, you can take advantage of these booms and busts to the detriment of the people. The people will suffer. The bankers get richer. And I shouldn't say the bankers, certain bankers. The Federal Reserve was the brainchild of Edward Mendel House, Wilson's top advisor. He wrote in his own 1912 book, Philip Drew Administrator, that he was working for socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx. Later on, he helped found the Council on Foreign Relations. People can't believe this stuff. You know, they have a tough time believing that there's a conspiracy, that these people aren't honest and everything else. And I like to quote J. Edgar Hoover out of Elks magazine back in 1956, where he said, and he's talking about communism, yet the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to a realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst. It rejects even the assumption that human creatures could espouse a philosophy which must ultimately destroy all that is good and decent. Now, the Council on Foreign Relations stands for two things: one world under socialism. Now, you can call it any way you want, but it's a managed economy by the government, and in a word, that's socialism. Now, it's interesting to note that Paul Volcker joined the Council in 1970, and 9 years later was named chairman of the Federal Reserve. And in his confirmation hearings, he said the standard of living of the average American has to decline. I don't think you can escape that, and he was for it. It wasn't just a statement of fact, it was something he was for. Next came Alan Greenspan. In the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. So he understands that, right? That was in 1967, and 11 years later he joined the Council on Foreign Relations, and 9 years after that he was named chairman of the Federal Reserve. A good definition of inflation is an increase in the amount of currency in circulation, resulting in a relatively sharp and sudden fall in its value and a rise in prices. Now, this is the dictionary I use before they started to change definitions. Some definitions in the dictionaries you see today doesn't say that. You have no clue of it except that it's a rise in prices and wages, and that's not what it is. That is the effect. That is not what causes it. It's not rising prices. You don't blame the businessman or the landlord. It's an increase in the quantity of currency. Either the counterfeiter does that or the government's partner, in this case, the Federal Reserve. Now, I like to quote Mark Twain from time to time. I don't always agree with his politics, but I sure like the way he talks sometimes. The only difference between reality and fiction is that fiction needs to be credible. Because we're going to talk about some pretty incredible things, and this is where it does get incredible, but it's true. We see in the North American Union, and most of you are familiar with that, established actually it was the Security and Prosperity Partnership that was established in Waco, Texas by the heads of state of Mexico, the United States, and Canada back in 2005. And they put up an official website at spp.gov through the Commerce Department. And there they told the people what they were planning on doing. And for the purposes of what we're talking about today, they said that they wanted to integrate immediately medical services, environmental regulations, and banking regulations. See, what's happening in this country today with banking regulations that you see, plus many of those that are behind the scenes that we're starting to see in agreements between Canada and the United States and England and the United States, are part of bringing the banking regulations into a comfortable area to where we can merge with the EU. That's what's going on. Also, medical services. The primary reason behind Obamacare is to comfortably merge the medical systems of Canada and the United States. They have a socialist system, we have a free enterprise. And you can't merge socialism with a free system. You can't. And so I don't hear that they're talking about getting rid of socialism up in Canada. So that's the purpose of it, is to be able to comfortably merge the two systems. Of course, they missed their deadline. Their deadline was 2010, right? A lot of you people were very active in stopping that. And Vicente Fox talked many times that what we want is to have a EU in North America. They want a European Union style thing in North America. Before we move on, I just want to show you the power of the Council on Foreign Relations. This picture was taken in the Oval Office under George Bush. And these are all the living or still alive Secretaries of Defense and State. Every one of them is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And of course, we see too under Barack Obama, he's going forward with this program. It's being done a lot more behind the scenes by salami slices. They don't have a website anymore, but they are promoting these things and steadily moving forward to the need of our integration, as Barack Obama says. Here, for instance, in the United States Northern Command, a year ago, they actually signed a treaty or an agreement rather, didn't have to go run it through Congress, between the heads of the armed forces of the three countries that allows Mexican and Canadian forces to come in the United States in case of a national emergency, either civil or natural. A conspiracy is nothing but a secret agreement of a number of men for the pursuit of policies which they dare not admit in public. Again, Mark Twain. I want to remind you of the New World Order, essentially a communist slogan. Here is the New World Order in H.G. Wells' book in 1940. He was a socialist leader in England. Here's Fidel Castro demanding it in front of the United Nations in 1979. Here's Gorbachev urging it in 1990. And here's George H.W. Bush making it the official national security strategy of the United States in August 1991, preface, A New World Order, signed by George Bush. It is now the official policy of the United States. Here's another one. A lot of people wanted to get rid of Obama, so I always asked them, oh, so you want Biden? Biden in April of 1992, How I Learned to Love the New World Order in the Wall Street Journal. And he gave speeches on the floor of the Senate advocating pretty much abolishing the United States and going into a new world order, and he put it into a booklet called On the Threshold of a New World Order. That's the kind of things we have. So where's all this going? The Socialist Party's new name is Social Democrats. It's semi-secret. Almost 80 members are in Congress. You wonder why we're losing? The Socialists are organized in Congress. The Constitutionalists are not. They're individualists. They can't get along. You know, I want to do it this way. No, I want to do it that way. And I want to be the leader. No, he should be the leader. The Socialists don't do that. They're collectivists. They always group together. At any rate, the Fed is a private corporation that pays no taxes, federal or state. It conforms to the communist plans to subjugate a country by controlling its economy. It's setting the stage for international controls under the NAU and UN through its economic policies. It's destroying the United States. And one of the things that I like to point out to a businessman is, how would you like one of your competitors to be given total power to regulate your industry? You know, if I'm a plumber and Washington, D.C. says the plumber down the street now can regulate all plumbers, which plumber do you think will get the business? I'll be out of business under a thing like that. That's what's happening to the banks. Small banks are atrophying and going out of business ultimately for one big bank because they've given this regulatory control to the Fed. Anyway, one of the big dangers is there will be no independent economic structure left to fight socialism if they have total control over the economy. We won't have the money to spend to fight them. So we have to fight them before they get to that point. And by the way, it has the trappings of capitalism, not communism. It's a policy reversal. Make it look like something it isn't. Have the open communist movement oppose Wall Street. Meanwhile, the secret high-level communists move their agenda forward. This confuses the average American. He's given two alternatives: support Wall Street or support the mob in the streets. Both are wrong. And what's the solution to all this? It's, number one, we have to audit the Fed. Then we have to evolve back into the use of precious metals. Then we have to abolish the Fed and abolish unconstitutional government agencies. And that's the way it is. And we do it through an informed electorate. It won't work unless we have an informed electorate. Nothing works without an informed electorate. The solution is simple. It's not easy. It means work. But it's much too long to present that here today. We'll present it more in other videos and tonight in some of our talks. In fact, I will. We've slowed it down, but we need to have more people concerned about the Fed and the NAU because they're interlocked. They just need more understanding of what's behind both of these initiatives to be able to stop it. The biggest problem we have is a lack of understanding out there in the business community itself, including the bankers. They really don't understand what's being done to them. Recommended reading, etc., and I'm out of here.